What if I told you one of the most poised, talented, and NFL-ready rookie quarterbacks in recent memory was never actually given a fair shot? What if the game was rigged from the moment he stepped on the field? Not by talent gaps, not by poor performance, but by quiet resistance, pre-written narratives, and a system that decided the verdict before the trial ever began. We're talking about Shedeur Sanders, and whether you think he's the next NFL star or not ready for the league, this story runs way deeper than just touchdown passes and interceptions. Because while some quarterbacks get patience, understanding, and support, others get pressure, pushback, and silence when it matters most. From media voices twisting his image, to coaches treating him like an afterthought, to analysts ignoring the facts right in front of them, this isn't just another sports story. This is about what happens when the media picks its favorite narrative and buries the truth right alongside it. Deion Sanders saw it. Mel Kiper Jr. called it out. And now, we're breaking it down. Because once you see everything that happened to Shedeur Sanders this season, you'll start wondering how many other players have had their careers quietly sabotaged before they ever had a real chance to begin. When Shedeur Sanders declared for the NFL draft, it wasn't just another college quarterback trying to make the leap. This was different. His last name carried weight. Expectations weren't just high, they were sky high. Coming off impressive performances at Jackson State and then continuing to deliver at Colorado under even more scrutiny, Shedeur wasn't walking into the NFL like most prospects. He arrived already under a microscope. Every throw, every scramble, every stare down from the pocket was being dissected and spun long before training camp even opened. And somehow, the decisions were already being made about him. Not by coaches behind closed doors, but by voices on TV, blogs, social media, guys with microphones and platforms bigger than some team facilities. There wasn't curiosity about what he could bring, just certainty about what he supposedly couldn't. It was blatant, and it was loud. Never mind that Shedeur had one of the cleanest mechanics in his draft class. Never mind that analysts with real film study backgrounds praised his composure, decision-making, and ability to read defenses. Somehow, none of that made it into the mainstream conversation. Instead, people defaulted to lazy critiques. He hesitates too much. He doesn't have the arm. He's just a system QB from a small school schedule. And instead of evaluating his actual game, they started evaluating the hype around him as if that was his fault. But here's what really had people twisted. Shedeur didn't play scared. He didn't shrink under pressure. He walked onto NFL soil with confidence, earned confidence, and that rubbed a lot of the wrong people the wrong way. Not because he was arrogant, but because he didn't fit the NFL's quiet rookie mold. He wasn't begging for approval. He was claiming his opportunity like he'd worked for it his whole life, which, spoiler alert, he had. Still, when the preseason started, things already looked off. While other rookies were getting early snaps, full reps, designed game plans built around their strengths, Shedeur was hovering in the background, thrown into uneven situations with little support. Some days, he wasn't even working with the starters. No real rhythm, no real runway, just short windows to prove himself or else. And every or else came with an avalanche of doubters saying, "Told you he wasn't ready." Now think about that for a minute. How many first-year quarterbacks are ever truly ready for the NFL jump? How many of them struggle early? All of them. That's the learning curve. That's the process. Development isn't just expected, it's baked into the job description. Rookie mistakes, adjustment periods, quirky growing pains, those are all considered normal, unless your name is Shedeur Sanders. Then it's not developmental, it's disastrous. Then every incompletion is a red flag, every interception is a crisis, and every quiet stretch of play is proof of failure. That's how unequal the expectations were right out the gate. And it's not just speculation, Deion Sanders saw it happening from the inside. He said it himself. His son didn't get a fair shot, not in practice, not in game prep, and certainly not from the media. Think about that for a second. What does it say when a Hall of Famer, who's coached his son for years, publicly calls out the system he's operating in because he knows it's rigged? And yet, that's exactly what happened. Not out of desperation, out of honesty. What's most telling is how quiet everyone else stayed. Coaches didn't deny it. Executives didn't speak up. And most analysts kept pushing the same surface-level talking points like they were reading from a script they didn't write. Meanwhile, insiders whispered about internal bias, coaches favoring safer, more traditional names in the QB room, avoiding noise, playing politics. The result? One of the most fundamentally sound young quarterbacks on the roster ended up an afterthought. Not because he earned a bench spot, but because the door was never really open in the first place. That's the part that stings. Because sure, you can hold a rookie accountable for bad decisions. You can critique mechanics, talk scheme fit, and debate readiness all day long, but only if you're doing it equally. And nothing about the way Shedeur was handled felt equal. Not the game reps, not the media response, not even the internal development plan, which, based on what we've learned, didn't seem to exist at all. How are you supposed to grow when they won't even let you walk? It's not just a talent issue. It's about opportunity. It's about repetition. It's about consistency. Shedeur didn't have a chance to settle in. Every moment was trial by fire. And even when he made solid plays, those never seemed to make the rounds on highlight reels or sports shows. It's as if no one really wanted to spotlight his progress, because that would have meant adjusting the story they'd already locked in. And here's where it gets even more telling. The same guys who were quick to bury Shedeur, they were silent when other rookies made the same mistakes. Suddenly, interception totals were part of the process. Suddenly, bad reads were chalked up to timing issues. Suddenly, the narrative allowed failure to be a stepping stone, just not for Shedeur. So ask yourself, why? Why wasn't he granted the same margin for error? Why wasn't there a plan to help him grow into the pro game like almost every other rookie quarterback in the league? Because when you take talent out of the equation and look solely at opportunity, that's where the story starts to reveal itself. This wasn't just a lack of development. It was a lack of willingness to even try. And if you think that kind of treatment doesn't eventually boil over, wait until you hear what happened when Deion finally had enough and Mel Kiper brought the receipts. At some point, you stop watching quietly and start speaking up. That's exactly what Deion Sanders did. And when he finally broke his silence about how his son was being treated, there was no soft language, no carefully crafted PR quotes, and definitely no sugar-coating. He wasn't trying to stir drama, he was defending reality. And in doing so, he showed just how broken this situation really was. This wasn't some emotional outburst from an overprotective dad. This was one of the most respected, results-driven minds in football, someone who's lived in both college and pro locker rooms, who understands systems, politics, and how player development should work, pointing his finger directly at the problem. And for once, he didn't hold back. Deion made it clear. What happened to Shedeur wasn't just tough love or competition. It was sabotage disguised as process. His son didn't get a real training camp, didn't get time with the ones, wasn't integrated into the system the way a quarterback with serious upside should have been. And while other rookies were being prepped, built up, and invested in, Shedeur was being sidelined, doubted, and quietly dismissed. The moments that would normally build trust between a player and his coaches never existed. Instead of structure, he got silence. Instead of mentorship, he got distance. And instead of being brought along like someone with long-term value, he was essentially told, without words, "You're not part of the plan, just show up. Don't expect much. Stay quiet." But the camera sees everything. And Deion saw it too. Whether it was decision-makers hesitating to back him, teammates unsure of his role, or the coaching staff avoiding commitment, the message was loud even when no one said a word. You're not the guy, and you probably won't be. That kind of environment breaks a lot of players, makes them lose confidence, makes them question if they've really got it. But Shedeur didn't fold. He stayed composed, did the work, stayed focused. And somehow, that just made people even more uncomfortable. There's a moment in every unfair situation when someone has to stand up and say, enough. That moment came when Deion Sanders went public, and the tone was different. He wasn't playfully defending his son. He put his foot down and said what we were all starting to think, that the media wasn't just tough, they were wildly inconsistent. That his son wasn't just being critiqued, he was being targeted. And worse, some of the people inside the building were okay with it. Deion pointed out what no analysts were acknowledging, that Shedeur Sanders had been up against far more than just NFL defenses. He was battling media narratives, political games behind the scenes, and a coaching system that never really embraced him. Think about how demoralizing that is. Think about what that would feel like, to fight through adversity your whole life, make it to the NFL, and realize the people you thought would coach you up are quietly working against you. This wasn't just frustration. It was grief. A father watching his son's name get dragged through the mud for things he couldn't even control. Bad throws happen. Interceptions happen. Every quarterback has those moments. But only Shedeur's mistakes got translated into character issues. People didn't just question the throws, they questioned him, his maturity, his humility, his dedication. And Deion refused to let that go on without pushback. The moment that hit the hardest, when Deion said point blank that no one played it fair this season. Not the media, not the coaches, not the front office. That line alone sent a shockwave through every sports broadcast table and podcast mic across the country. It told you everything you needed to know about how far gone this situation already was. But this wasn't just about blame. It was about setting the record straight. Because if the truth doesn't come out now, then stories like Shedeur's get buried, replaced by recycled takes calling him a bust, or worse, someone who never belonged in the first place. And that right there is exactly why Deion spoke out. And here's the wildest part, it worked. Because once Coach Prime opened the door, people couldn't pretend anymore. The questions got louder. The footage started circulating with fresh eyes. People started seeing what Deion saw, a quarterback who made throws under pressure, who showed control in chaos, who displayed leadership and mental toughness, traits teams usually love. Suddenly, the conversation changed. But it wasn't just because of Deion. It was because of who stepped in next. Because while Deion gave the emotional truth, someone else brought the cold facts. Someone who never gets involved in media feuds. Someone whose job depends entirely on honesty, consistency, and film, not opinions. When Mel Kiper Jr. came to Shedeur's defense, it didn't just validate everything Deion said, it blew the roof off of the whole thing. But that part of the story, that's where things go from emotional to explosive. When Mel Kiper Jr. joined the conversation, everything changed. See, it's one thing for a father to defend his son. People expect that. Some will even dismiss it immediately, chalking it up to bias, emotion, or pride. But Mel Kiper, that's different. He's not in press conferences. He's not coaching Shedeur. He's one of the most respected voices in football analysis, a name anchored to decades of tape study, player development, and draft forecasting. This isn't a guy who plays favorites. He built his entire reputation on objectivity, on doing the work, on watching the film when no one else will. So when he looked directly at the camera and basically said, "A lot of these media takes about Deion Sanders are just straight up lies," that wasn't correction, that was exposure. He didn't scream. He didn't rant. He didn't beg the audience to believe him. He just said the quiet part out loud. The way people were talking about Shedeur didn't match the reality on film. And it wasn't even subtle. It was deliberate. The media had decided what they wanted the narrative to be, and no fact, no breakdown, no performance could shake their conclusion. Kiper wasn't just defending a player. He was putting his credibility on the line to call out a deeper issue in how we talk about quarterbacks. In a league where we pretend to value data, growth, and film before opinion, he exposed the exact opposite. So many of the loudest voices were operating off bias, not tape. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. This wasn't just an oops moment from the media. This was weeks, months of repeated messages, twisting minor errors into career-defining flaws. Shedeur tosses one interception, and it's a red flag. Another QB throws two in the same game, and suddenly it's a rough outing or the supporting cast let him down. That type of inconsistency doesn't happen by accident. It happens when perception is treated as fact. Mel Kiper pulled no punches. He said outright that Deion Sanders wasn't the problem was perception. The way the outside world talked about him was louder and more damaging than anything actually showing up on game film. And when Mel planted that flag, the temperature shifted. Quietly at first, but then fast. Because now people had to choose. Keep repeating the same lazy narratives, or admit that maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong? Let's be honest, rarely do analysts walk back the takes they've already pushed. There's too much pride in the space. Too much branding built around being right first, not right eventually. But what Mel did, that forced the conversation to reset. It dragged everyone back to the core truth. Was Deion Sanders being criticized for how he played or for who he was? And the proof was sitting right there. Every time Shedeur stepped on the field, you saw elements coaches normally praise: quick release, poise under fire, an understanding of pressure looks, and a refusal to unravel after a bad play. He responded like a pro. A rookie, sure, but a composed one. Yet he was being judged like someone who didn't belong at the level at all. That disconnect? That's not analysis, that's something else entirely. Mel Kiper didn't have to get involved. Let's remember that. He makes his bread studying rookies and projecting them for the draft. He's not in the business of cleaning up media messes or defending players who are already in the league. There was no benefit to speaking out. no agenda to protect. Nothing to gain by stepping into a firestorm unless the tape truly demanded it. And that's what made his words so powerful. When someone with nothing to gain risks their credibility to tell the truth, you have to pay attention. The reality Mel pointed to wasn't groundbreaking, but it shook the building anyway. Shedeur Sanders wasn't just a quarterback learning on the job. He was a quarterback being denied the job while critics simultaneously blamed him for not delivering greatness he wasn't allowed the space to pursue. It was a setup, and Mel said it plainly. Not just that the coverage was biased, but that it was dishonest. That allegation, that's serious. Because once you pull that thread, a lot of things start to unravel. Why were decision makers in love with quarterbacks posting worse film? Why were fans only seeing cherry-picked stats from Shedeur's worst moments? Why were media personalities so quick to mock him before he played a full series with starters? Kiper never said there weren't flaws. Every rookie has them. Shedeur made some rookie throws, took some sacks he should have avoided, and stared down receivers a bit too long. That's normal. That's NFL Adjustment 101. But unlike the rest of his draft peers, Shedeur wasn't allowed to struggle silently. His mistakes were held up as proof that he didn't belong, even when other quarterbacks were doing the same or worse and being praised for flashes of potential. That's what Mel obliterated with one calm, surgical statement. He removed the mask. And underneath it, we saw what Deion had been arguing all along. His son wasn't getting the benefit of the doubt or the chance to grow. He was being buried beneath expectations no rookie should carry, then punished for not meeting them instantly. Once that truth hit the spotlight, another question followed, and this time people couldn't ignore it. If the film shows promise, if the work ethic is real, and if evaluators like Mel Kiper can back it up, then who's actually holding Shedeur Sanders back? Because at that point, it wasn't about interceptions anymore. It wasn't about reps or rotations. Something bigger was getting exposed, and the next part of this story proves exactly how deep the double standard runs. The moment Mel Kiper dropped the truth bomb, things got uncomfortable fast, because it forced people to confront something they'd been pretending wasn't there. A double standard. A loud, visible, undeniable double standard that didn't start with Shedeur Sanders, but exposed itself through him. You couldn't ignore it anymore when the comparisons started rolling in. You had quarterbacks around the league throwing just as many picks, missing just as many reads, struggling with the exact same rookie growing pains, but the way those struggles were talked about, worlds apart. When Joe Burrow tossed a pick six, the analysis was nuanced. Bad O-line. Receiver ran the wrong route. Timing was off. The conversation turned into a breakdown of scheme, pressure, personnel. You heard words like adjustment period and veteran awareness, words designed to protect a player's reputation no matter the stat line. Now flip that and look at how Shedeur was treated after just a few mistakes. A tipped pass here, a mistimed route there, one forced throw under pressure, and suddenly the headlines weren't about development. They were about doubt. Not a real NFL starter. Doesn't have the tools. Not ready. It wasn't just harsh, it was cold. No context, no analysis, just labels, and labels stick. That was the real problem. Once Shedeur was marked as overhyped, everything that followed got viewed through that lens. Make a great throw? Doesn't matter, it was the system. Handle a pressure look perfectly? Doesn't count, fluke. Stay poised in the pocket while the protection collapses around you? He's too slow, not decisive enough. The frame was already set. And no matter what showed up on film, it was going to be interpreted the same way, through the filter of a narrative people had already locked in. That's not football analysis anymore. That's branding. That's repackaging a storyline and selling it, regardless of what the truth looks like on tape. And once Mel Kiper shattered that illusion, people started digging deeper. Because if Shedeur Sanders was being judged unfairly, who else is dealing with the same thing? And more importantly, why? You start noticing the way some players are granted time. Not just weeks, but whole seasons. Some quarterbacks post terrible numbers their first year and still get labeled the future. Some go winless for half the season and still get called a project worth investing in. But Shedeur, he never even got to fail at full volume. He was picked apart off limited reps, judged with half the data, and labeled before he even had enough film to build a case in his defense. It was like he entered the league with one strike already on the board, and no one could explain why. Was it the name? Was it the noise around his father, Coach Prime? Was it the confidence? The refusal to shrink into quiet humility just to make people more comfortable? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. For some quarterbacks, confidence is celebrated. Swagger gets elevated. Weatherman level cool becomes part of their brand. But when Shedeur spoke with composure, when he refused to fold under pressure, refused to pretend he wasn't built for the moment, that got twisted into arrogance. Thinks he's too good, too media slick, needs to sit and learn humility. And that's when the conversation drifted from football and into something else entirely. Because confidence in a player isn't just about personality, it's about permission. Who's allowed to be bold without getting punished? Who's allowed to be confident without being labeled cocky? That's where the hypocrisy screams the loudest. You've got quarterbacks out there walking into pressers acting like superstars after throwing for 150 yards and a pick, and the media calls it charisma. Shedeur sits down calm, focused, measured, and it becomes attitude. Why? That's the burning question nobody inside the building seems to want to answer. Because if you admit the standard isn't being applied evenly, then you have to go deeper. You have to answer for why some guys are handed the keys to the franchise, while others have to fight just to sit in the driver's seat, even when the skills, the work ethic, and the tapes say they deserve more. And don't forget, much of this wasn't just happening on the field. It was happening in meetings, behind closed doors. Reports started circling about coaches simply not trusting Shedeur, preferring safer options, or believing he needed more seasoning, despite never giving him the chance to prove otherwise. All that did was force a young quarterback into a storm without shelter, every down a test, every snap a judgment. Even when he quietly did his job, kept his head down, and improved in silence, the coverage didn't catch up. Why? Because the storyline had more value than the scoreboard. That's the sin nobody wants to talk about. In the NFL, once you're slotted into a narrative, escaping it takes a miracle. And for quarterbacks, perception becomes reality fast. If the media decides you're poised, you get grace. If the media decides you're a problem, no amount of box score magic will save you. That's what Shedeur walked into, and what Mel Kiper managed to drag into daylight. He didn't expose just bias. He exposed the entire culture of moving goalposts. Where one quarterback's mistakes are proof of growth, and another's are a reason to bury him, where names matter more than numbers, and where storylines define potential before potential even gets to speak. That's the reality Deion Sanders faced. From coaches who didn't believe, to media who wouldn't listen. But as the hypocrisy started unraveling, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a matter of talent. It was a matter of treatment. And if Shedeur was the only one brave enough to stand in it, and still prepare like a pro, then maybe he wasn't just born for this. Maybe he was built for it. By now, it was clear the public narrative didn't match the reality. But the real damage wasn't just being done by outsiders on sports shows and podcasts. The most dangerous part of this story happened behind the scenes, inside the very walls where Deion Sanders was supposed to be developing. Because no matter how talented a rookie quarterback is, no matter how hard he works or how confident he stays, he still needs something the NFL doesn't always talk about: a real plan, a runway, a structure that allows him to grow without looking over his shoulder after every throw. And he never got that. In meetings, practices, scrimmages, everywhere reps are supposed to build rhythm, Shedeur found himself looking in from the outside. While other quarterbacks were getting first-team chemistry, real-time adjustments, full-speed reps with the guys they'd actually be throwing to on Sundays, Shedeur was often stuck with backups, or worse, not repping at all. That doesn't just ruin development, it prevents it from even starting. You can't simulate pressure if you're never part of the equation. You can't develop timing with weapons you're not allowed to work with. And you certainly can't expect a rookie to prove himself in scrub reps while other players benefit from trust the coaches decided to give them on day one. It takes more than talent to succeed in the NFL. It takes an ecosystem that believes in you. But what Shedeur walked into wasn't a system built to help him succeed. It was one designed to control how far he could go. And let's be clear, this wasn't about being too raw. This wasn't about needing time or polishing up a few habits. That's normal for college to pro transitions. This was different. This was about how the staff approached him from the beginning. There was doubt baked into every move, quiet resistance, a lack of investment. He's not ready? Okay, then help get him ready. That's the job. That's the story so many young quarterbacks live through but never speak on, when the coaching staff makes internal decisions before the competition even starts. When no matter how sharp you look in drills, how clean the footwork is, how quick the reads are, the belief just isn't there. It never was. And what makes it worse is that nobody says it out loud. There's no meeting, no honest explanation, No walk and talk where they tell you, look, here's what we need from you. They just fade you out. They give the other guy more time, more flexibility, more opportunity to work through mistakes. Meanwhile, your leash gets shorter and shorter. Until one mistake does what 10 good days couldn't, confirm their doubts. That's not preparation. That's sabotage disguised as evaluation, and the consequences run deep. Because QB development isn't just about physical mechanics, it's emotional too. Players need rhythm, confidence, stability. They need to know where they stand so they can go to work every day with clarity. Without it, you're constantly trying to guess what the staff thinks of you, and that guessing game kills growth. For Shedeur, every week became an audition, and not the kind that challenges players to rise. The kind that grinds them down, replaying every small error in high definition. You don't build stars that way. You burn them out. You keep them cautious. You shake the very thing that makes quarterbacks special, decisiveness. And when the moment finally came, when a few live snaps were dropped on his lap under pressure, without rhythm, without a cushion to settle in, the critics were ready. They weren't watching his reads. They weren't clocking the complexity of the defense or factoring in broken protections. They wanted a meltdown. That's what they came to find. And no matter how composed he stayed, any misfire became proof that he's not it. That wasn't coaching. That was confirmation bias from the outside, enabled by confusion from the inside. And you could see it in how the organization handled the backup plan. The quarterback room itself became a symbol of the indecision. Veteran journeymen rotating in and out. Practice squad guys randomly elevated. Shedeur handed the scraps, not just in terms of reps, but in terms of transparency. The team never made a real commitment to developing him, and when people started asking why, they responded by doubling down on the myth that he was ready. Ready for what? He never got the same reps, never got the same support, never got the rhythm that turns rookies into reliable starters. And yet somehow he was supposed to walk in cold, outrun a biased building, and become proof of concept in 3 series or less. That's not football. That's sabotage. Eventually, even his calm demeanor started getting weaponized. He's too relaxed. You can't tell if he's really hungry. The same traits that were praised when he was winning in college, his poise, his patience, his ability to stay even in high-pressure moments, now got reframed as weaknesses. But ask anyone who's played quarterback at the pro level. Panic is failure. Remaining calm under chaos, that's strength. Confusing composure with complacency isn't analysis, it's projection. So while most rookie QBs were being thrown into development plans, tailored play calling, and game day support systems, Shedeur was being tossed into the deep end with no life vest, then blamed for not swimming fast enough. This is what happens when an organization doesn't just hesitate to believe in you, it quietly hopes you prove them right for doubting you. And in that kind of system, the worst part isn't what you do wrong, it's what you're never given the chance to do right. Even through everything happening around him, the lopsided reps, the questionable coaching decisions, the media twisting every angle they could, Deion Sanders showed exactly what you want from a leader. He stayed calm. He stayed composed. He stayed focused. He didn't lash out. He didn't make excuses. He just kept doing the work. But somehow, even that became a problem. The leadership Shedeur displayed, staying poised under chaos, showing maturity in interviews, being unshaken by the noise, didn't fit the script they tried to pin on him. So instead of acknowledging that strength, they spun it, painted it as cockiness, arrogance, as if staying cool under pressure was arrogance instead of discipline. Let's be real, we've seen this before. When a quarterback shows emotion, depending on who he is, it's framed as passion. When he stomps the sidelines or gets fiery in huddles, it's seen as leadership. But when Shedeur kept his expression tight, kept his answers professional, kept his patience high, that wasn't leadership to them. It was a bad attitude. Low energy. Entitlement. How do you win in a system like that, where the same traits that are praised in other players are weaponized against you? It's not that Shedeur didn't lead. It's that his leadership didn't match the mold they built for him, but ask his teammates. Ask people who have actually stepped onto a field with him. The respect is real. The preparation is there. The work ethic is undeniable. The quiet command of the locker room, that's not arrogance. That's what leadership often looks like when it's not performing for cameras. And yet none of that mattered to the narrative machine. They wanted personality, but only a specific kind. They wanted charisma, but only the kind they'd already approved. Shedeur wasn't allowed to own his confidence, even though he'd earned every ounce of it. Because let's be honest, when some quarterbacks show up with swagger, it's branded as magnetic. He's got that alpha energy. That unteachable it factor. But when Shedeur carries himself like that, Oh, he's full of himself. He thinks he's already made it. He needs to be humbled. It becomes less about what he's doing and more about how uncomfortable it makes certain people, which tells you everything you need to know. Confidence isn't the problem. It's the permission to show it. Shedeur was confident because he put the work in, because he stayed in the film room, because even when the game plan was stacked against him, he kept making the right reads, adjusting protections, and doing exactly what pro quarterbacks are supposed to do. But the coverage didn't reflect that. It dismissed it, laughed at it, mocked it as style over substance, even when the tape said otherwise. And as if that wasn't enough, they started pulling out the most ridiculous theory of them all, that he wouldn't be able to handle cold weather because he played in warm climates. That alone should have been enough to disqualify half the NFL from praise at some point in their careers. Nobody permanently lives in football weather. That didn't stop Tom Brady, who played college ball in Michigan and dominated in icy Foxborough. Didn't stop Drew Brees, who played high school and college in warm weather, then tore up the entire NFC indoors. Even the climate angle was a reach. It wasn't analysis. It was noise. Another weak attempt to create doubt where there wasn't any. Because when the reality doesn't support the narrative, the media doesn't change the narrative, they change the rules. That's what happened with Shedeur. They moved the goalposts so many times, it became obvious they were never meant to stay in one place anyway. They didn't want to evaluate him for who he was. They wanted him to prove he wasn't who they had already decided he must be, and when he didn't fall apart the way they expected, they started changing the grading scale. He didn't just have to play well, he had to be perfect. He couldn't just be solid, he had to be phenomenal. He couldn't just lead. He had to outlead everyone around him to even be seen as equal. That level of pressure creates a kind of invisible cage. No mistake is small. No quiet success is ever enough. And through it all, he never cracked. That alone should have earned respect. But instead, it only amplified the hate. Because Deion Sanders didn't fit the familiar template. And to some people, that made him the problem. The truth is, Shedeur wasn't asking for special treatment. He wasn't demanding anyone crown him. What he wanted, what Deion wanted, was equal treatment. The same timeline, the same learning curve, the same support system that other young quarterbacks get, even while they're still trying to figure it out. But when you walk into a room where you're already seen as too polished, too confident, too backed by your last name, people stop rooting for your success and start waiting on your failure. That's what Shedeur was walking into. Not just a league, not just a locker room, but an atmosphere already full of quiet resistance. And the scariest part, he handled it like a pro, which begs the most important question yet. If a quarterback can do all the right things, show all the right traits, and still get cast aside, then maybe it was never about the quarterback to begin with. By this point, you've probably noticed something. This story stopped being just about Deion Sanders a long time ago. Because when you strip away the names, the logos on the jerseys, the headlines, the opinions, you're left with a bigger, messier truth. This system doesn't treat every player the same. That's not a theory, that's a pattern. And once you see it, it's hard to unsee. Shedeur's story just happens to be a particularly sharp example, not because it's rare, but because it's so visible. He had the name, he had the spotlight. And still, it wasn't enough to protect him from the cycle. The cycle that takes young, confident, talented quarterbacks and churns them through a machine that cares more about clicks than context. That cycle usually starts the moment a player enters the conversation. The labels come early and they stick. Raw, cocky, overhyped, system guy, each one a quiet limiter. Each one shaping how fans and execs and media members will interpret everything that comes after. Shedeur was never given a blank slate. He was dealt a script. And he had to play against it every single day. And even when he did things right, stayed calm, made the smart plays, put in the work, it hardly shifted the perception. Because it didn't fit. People weren't watching to learn more. They were watching to confirm what they already thought they knew. And that mindset has destroyed more young talent than we'd like to admit. The worst part? This kind of bias doesn't usually scream. It whispers. It shows up in how reps get distributed in practice. It appears in which stats get highlighted on shows, which film clips make it into analysis segments, and which mistakes go viral while the clean reads never trend. Sometimes, it's not what they say, it's what they choose not to say. And Shedeur felt all of it. Every backhanded compliment. Every sentence that started with "I like the kid," but every empty nod to his work ethic followed by a completely unrelated criticism about his demeanor or his brand. It wasn't journalism. It was image control, painting a version of Shedeur that people could comfortably doubt. This isn't unique to him, but the specifics matter. Because when someone like Shedeur, who checks so many of the boxes we claim to value, discipline, calm under pressure, film obsession, leadership by example, is still framed as undeserving, you have to ask what the real disqualifier is. Was it that he didn't play the media's game? That he didn't bow his head and try to earn back some imaginary trust they never gave him? Or was it that every time he kept his head up and refused to break, it reminded people they misjudged him? The media doesn't like being wrong. And when a player makes them look wrong without saying a word, the response is rarely accountability. It's escalation, louder doubts, more personal critiques. Try a new angle. Criticize the weather, the school he came from, the way he talks in interviews. Suddenly, you're not just debating performance, you're reshaping perception. And let's not pretend this happens evenly across the board. Every year we see quarterbacks given second, third, even fourth chances to work through their flaws. Criticism, if it comes, is softened with excuses. The scheme isn't a fit. He needs a better O-line. Give him time. But Shedeur never got that generosity. From day one, every mistake was a red flag. No grace, no curiosity, just verdicts. Becomes impossible to just play football when the microscope never sets you down. Every throw becomes a headline, and every headline makes that next throw twice as heavy. That's what Deion was fighting against. That's why Mel Kiper spoke up. Because it wasn't just a few harsh takes. It was systemic. It was the way conversations about Shedeur were being framed, without film, without fairness, and definitely without acknowledgement of how the system around him was failing. This goes deeper than football. Deion saw his son walk into a league where upside is praised if you fit the look, where confidence is charisma if it feels familiar, where mistakes are development unless you wear the wrong jersey or name or skin tone. And to be clear, this isn't about asking for protection from criticism. No player should be above that. This is about consistent standards, honest evaluation. If Shedeur missed a read, call it out. If he stared down a guy too long, break it down. But don't pretend he's the only rookie quarterback making those mistakes. Don't pretend like he's the first to struggle early in a system that never had his back. Because that's when bad coverage turns into real damage. That's when careers get shortened not by injury, but by branding. When fans lose patience not because of performance, but because of perception. And when quarterbacks start carrying doubt, not because they lack talent, but because the environment around them refuses to believe. Through all of that, Shedeur kept going. And that alone tells you more about him than any media take ever could. But now, the real conversation begins. Because if the league claims to be built on grit, development, and next man up mentality, then why do so many young quarterbacks never get a chance to become that next man? Why is the learning curve accepted for some and treated like failure for others? Why do some narratives survive every bad game, while others explode the second you blink wrong? And maybe most importantly, what would the NFL look like if quarterbacks were actually judged by their performance, not by the person people expected them to be? That's the question hanging heavy in the air. And the final part of this story pushes it even further. When you zoom out far enough, you start to realize this was never just about Deion Sanders. His story is really about how the system works, or doesn't, depending on who you are, how you look, how you carry yourself, and whether you fit into the box people built before you arrived. Because that's what this entire journey has exposed. It wasn't just bad coaching or flawed media coverage. It was a tangled web of bias, politics, and perception, all working together to deny a young quarterback a fair shot at proving himself. And when someone like Shedeur finally pushes through that wall just enough for the truth to come out, it doesn't just reveal cracks in the system. It shows that the foundation might be broken altogether. We say the NFL is a meritocracy, that if you work hard, stay prepared, and perform under pressure, you'll rise. But the reality is more fragile than that. It's built not just on talent, but on how people interpret that talent. It's about how narratives attach themselves to players and either carry them forward or weigh them down. In Shedeur's case, it wasn't just a lack of opportunity. It was an organized resistance to the very idea of him being taken seriously. He was never given room to grow into a starter. He was painted as someone who needed to wait his turn, even when the guys ahead of him weren't outperforming him. He was told he wasn't ready, but no one actually prepared him. And instead of supporting a young talent with clear traits, the people who controlled the environment around him decided they'd quietly wait for him to fail, and if he didn't, they'd move the goalposts until he did. That's what Coach Prime saw. That's why Mel Kiper spoke up. They weren't just defending Shedeur, they were pointing at a deeply flawed process where the media and the system feed off each other to reinforce whatever story they want to be true. Because when networks need talking points and franchises need excuses and click-driven coverage replaces honest analysis, that's when players stop being people and start becoming products. Expectations are no longer based on preparation or film. They're dictated by headlines that get written before the games even happen. And the damage, it doesn't just hurt reputations. It stunts careers, it closes doors, it pushes talented athletes into silence. They stop speaking up. They stop showing confidence. They stop shining. Because the moment they do, someone somewhere is ready to accuse them of doing too much. So ask yourself, how many quarterbacks were quietly ruined by this system? How many never had a true QB coach invest time, never had the chance to build chemistry with the starters, never saw the trust extended to grow through rookie mistakes? We don't talk about those guys. We write them off. We slap the bust label on them and move on to the next name. But if we're not holding the system accountable, if we're not questioning how these players are developed, we're complicit in letting it happen again. Deion Sanders' biggest challenge has never been talent. It wasn't leadership. It wasn't preparation, poise, or pressure. It was the narrative, the quiet resistance from inside organizations, the loud resistance on TV, the shifting expectations. The moments that should have been growth opportunities turned into death sentences the second he didn't perform on somebody else's made-up timeline. This isn't about protecting players from criticism. It's about holding that criticism to the same standard we claim football is built on: fairness, competition, and facts. Because no one is saying Shedeur can't be evaluated. He should be. Every quarterback should be. But that evaluation should be clean, honest, rooted in tape, not in feelings, not in preconceptions. And if the league pretends to be transparent, if the media claims to be objective, then it's time they act like it. Because when people in power don't confront their own bias, it bleeds into the game. It becomes culture. It becomes routine. And suddenly, who's allowed to lead a franchise isn't based on what happens on Sundays anymore, it's based on what people decided months before. In the end, Shedeur may prove his critics wrong in spite of everything. He might earn that shot, seize it, and go on to have the kind of career people pretended he wasn't capable of. Or maybe he'll never get the chance, and we'll be left talking about what could have been. Either way, we'll know what really happened. Because now the curtain's been pulled back. No more pretending this was just about football. No more pretending the system is neutral. Deion Sanders' story doesn't just challenge the way we evaluate quarterbacks. It forces us to ask why we haven't been evaluating how we evaluate in the first place. And that's a conversation the NFL, the media, and the fans can't avoid anymore. So where does that leave us? After everything, after the media noise, the internal resistance, the inconsistent standards, the headlines that cared more about clicks than truth, what are we really left with? A young quarterback who did everything the right way and still got left behind. He worked, he waited, he led, he handled pressure with maturity. He responded to chaos with quiet control. He made mistakes, sure, but he also made the kinds of plays that should have led to opportunity, to growth, to trust. And yet none of it was enough to shift the narrative. Because the truth is, the narrative was never designed to shift. It was designed to trap. That's the part so many people still don't understand. Deion Sanders wasn't being held to a high standard. He was being held to a different one. And when the NFL pretends that doesn't happen, when media personalities pretend it's all just football talk, we lose the ability to grow as a sport. And worse, we lose real talent for reasons we're too proud to admit. Because this league, this billion-dollar machine we love so much, isn't just about who plays the best. It's about who gets access, who gets believed in, who gets time. And when that belief isn't equally distributed, it shows in the depth charts, in the comment sections, in the bloated expectations, in who's given the benefit of the doubt and who's buried before they even take a real snap. You don't have to be a Shedeur fan to see that. You just have to be honest. Tell the truth. If his name was Sanders, if he wasn't tied to a father with bold expectations and bright lights, if he didn't walk in with confidence instead of apologetic humility, do you really think he would have been attacked the same way? Would his interceptions have been treated like fatal flaws instead of rookie learning curves? Would lack of reps be blamed on him or questioned for what it actually says about the coaching staff? Would people have reserved even an ounce of curiosity? Before locking in on the conclusion, See, no one's asking you to root for him, but you should root for fairness. Because this ain't just about one player. It's about the next one, and the one after that. Because if narratives keep determining development, if perception matters more than performance, then the next talented kid from a so-called loud family or a headline-grabbing college system is going to get the same treatment. And we're gonna watch it all unfold again, the silent sabotage, the offhand remarks, the invisible walls dressed up as coaching decisions. And it's going to keep happening, unless people start calling it out. Deion Sanders was right to speak up. Mel Kiper was right to bring film receipts. Fans were right to question what was happening. And now, maybe more people are finally starting to realize that this isn't some isolated incident. This is a pattern, a system failure. One that punishes confidence in certain players and protects excuses in others. The media gatekeepers, they won't always check themselves. That's not their business model. And franchises, let's be real, most of them protect egos before they protect players. But someone has to look at these situations with clear eyes and say, hold on, that's not criticism. That's bias. That's not analysis. That's branding. That's not a fair shot. That's sabotage. Because if we keep ignoring it, nothing changes. And more quarterbacks like Shedeur, young, gifted, composed, ready to learn, are going to end up defined not by how they play, but by how they're framed. So now the question comes back to you. Not just as a viewer, not just as a fan of the game, but someone with the ability to read between the lines. Did the NFL ever give Deion Sanders a fair shot? Or was the system so locked into its assumptions that nothing he did was ever going to be enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just about who's right, it's about what's real. And if you've been paying attention, you already know this was never about talent. It was about truth. And for the first time in a long time, people are finally starting to see it.